talking about multimedia and integrating technology into the curriculum. So, what is technology? I mean, we've talked about technology integration throughout this, the last month, and we've really never actually defined what technology integration is. We've shown you what it looks like, and we've shown you some of the skills that you and your students need to have, but what is technology integration? Is it putting computers into a classroom or a school? No, it's not just putting computers into a school. Um, that's just the tool. Is it providing the application software and access to the internet? Nope. Is it 30 minutes per day of computer skill development? No. Technology integration is using computers to teach 30 minutes of reading. So you see how I changed the words a little bit around um, and incorporated that content. It's teaching with computers 30 minutes of reading. So is technology integration learning to use a word processor? Yeah, no. Is it learning to search the internet? No. It's learning how and why to use a word processor to better communicate ideas. And I know in the last module there was a lot of debate about grammar, punctuation, thinking with word processing, and that a lot of you feel that you cannot think using a word processor, and that is not true in my opinion. Our job as educators is not to teach students the way we were taught. A lot of us didn't have access to these computers. We don't teach with technology the way we were taught. We have to teach students the way that they need to think. So if you feel that a student isn't thinking when they're writing, it is up to you to come up with a way to have them think with that writing word processing software. So again, technology integration is searching the internet for information related to your curriculum, to your goals and your activities. Using technology resources in the general content areas like history, math, science, social studies to allow students to learn how to apply their computer skills in meaningful ways in a real world situations to create, to solve problems, to think. And technology resources is things like computers, digital cameras, CD-ROM software, web internet applications, and those other things. iPads and printers, etc. So we use technology and integrate it so that students can, just to recap, learn, research. We use it to motivate them, to have them create. And in order to do that, we have to look at ourselves. There's some things that there's some studies that have been done about barriers to technology integration. And this class is only an introduction, and so it's not going to cover everything. There's 250 minimum hours of training that an educator needs to be thoroughly capable of integrating technology into the curriculum. So some of the barriers that they found that keep teachers and students from getting that integration is there's a lack of teacher training. There's security constraints. Districts have some issues with security and in what software and access to the internet, and even the safety of our children. Sometimes it's a lack of administrative support. If an administrator has never taught with technology, which you'll find in a lot of older administrators, then they're not going to understand the importance of teaching technology and teaching, and integrating it with the classroom. So, it's almost up to you sometimes to train your administrators. Planning with technology is very time consuming. I will tell you that you will spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out where and when you're going to integrate. And so my suggestion is that you start out slowly. Don't go in there the first day of class and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to just do everything today. Pick and choose and integrate slowly, because one, then you become comfortable, and two, it allows you to see what works and what doesn't. A lot of times with technology, it's about experience as well as just flat out learning. If computers are placed in remote locations in your building, you have to walk there. There's also constraints in access to mobile carts and things like that. Sometimes it's just budget. And contrary to common belief, a lot of people think that the poor, the school district, the lack of resources, I've found that that's not always true, because you get so much federal funding in poor school districts that they tend to have a lot more state of the art. When I was teaching in East Aurora, they had whiteboards in their classroom before the Batavia school districts did. So, that's not always the case. High-speed school networks. I know that Obama is pushing for that 16 gig Wi-Fi, but right now your average is anywhere from 2 to 6, 6 being at the high end. And then, then that broadband, every time you have a computer accessing that Wi-Fi, it limits the amount of broad bandwidth that's available to all the computers. And then finally, you just have a basic resistance to change. I mean, I see it even in this class. That idea that students can write with word processing, there's a resistance there, so you have to really look at your motivations for not doing something, and is it because you're uncomfortable with that technology, or do you really believe, after you philosophically review all of the research, that yes, this is why you are not going to use that particular program? So I will tell you though that as we go on, and as we move deeper into the use of technology in our schools and in our businesses, that technology is changing the way that we teach. No longer are we, standing at the front of a classroom dispensing knowledge with, that almighty guru. Now we're what is called a facilitator. We facilitate learning, not by telling students exactly what they need to know, but by planning our lessons so that students are creating their own knowledge, and we're answering questions, and even learning along with them. And that's where we become co-creators of product and projects and problem solving. When we set up a lesson, we're encouraging everybody to solve problems as a group, and remember that you, even the youngest child, can teach you something. And then we also guide and tutor them. So it's in some ways this way of teaching can be more pleasurable, but to get it really set up properly, it can be time consuming. So what you need to do is you need to familiarize yourself by becoming aware of the technology and its potential uses. And that's what this class is kind of doing. We're not going in depth into anything, but we're kind of showing you a little bit of everything that's out there so that you can see the potential, so that you can start thinking in your head, "Ooh, I'd like to do that." Next, you have to be able to utilize that technology. you get frustrated with minor problems and then you say, okay, I'm not going to use it anymore. Get past that frustration. Remember, there's always a beach somewhere, and technology is going to have its issues. I know that in one of my classes, I think it was at Wabanzi, the second day of school, I went in and the projector was all messed up, and so it kind of messed up the whole lesson plan for the day, and so I had to contact the technology people, and they came in and they didn't know what was going on. So it was a really good example of how you just have to have patience and always have a backup plan. If technology, the internet goes down, make sure when you are doing your planning that you also have a backup. People can always pull a pen and a piece of paper out, and that's what's nice about pen and paper. So you also integrate. Technology becomes essential for the educational process. And as you grow and develop as a technology integrator, you'll begin to think constantly about how to integrate technology into your classroom. You'll start, as you're searching for ideas, you're going to tend to gear more towards the technology integration, to the web applications, to the concepts that come with personal productivity software. And then you also have to constantly reorient yourself. You have to rethink your goals with the use of technology. So no longer are you going to say, okay, students need to be able to compare and contrast. What you need to think is students will need to be able to compare and contrast and support that information with research that they find at such and such website. The classroom then evolves into a completely integrated model of technology in all the subject areas. It becomes a tool that is as seamless as textbooks, pens, paper, and the chalkboard. And even though we are still in this transitional stage, it is possible to look at technology and then become as comfortable with it as you do with pen and paper. So now let's talk about the specific ways that you can integrate technology into the classroom. Learning is a process, and what they've started calling it, there's four broad areas of learning with technology. The first one is participatory learning. Participatory learning is when students become engaged. They are participating. They are asking questions. They're investigating. They're reflecting on what they learn. They're problem solving. They're formulating questions and then they're answering them. It's wonderful to watch when students are working together and talking to each other and participating. Anchored instruction is where you provide a knowledge base that students can build on. So, for example, you teach them the basics of a topic and then let them build on that topic themselves and expand it. Problem-based instruction is where students use background or the anchoring information to solve complex problems. A lot of times this will be based on real-life problems. In your classroom, you ask your students to determine how many laps they have to run to lose 3 pounds. If there's a mile, how many miles they have to run. If you're working in a science class, have students try and discover ways of recycling. This is all, in their own communities. This is all problem-based instruction. And then finally, the fourth way of learning with technology is the inquiry-based or discovery learning. It's where you give them a topic and let them go out and discover and then come back and teach that to others. So here's some specific ways, and these are by all means not all of the ways to integrate, but let's just look at them. One way you can integrate technology, and we've already worked on that, is to create a class website. On that website, you can put problems out there for students to solve. You can go out and put websites or readings that you want them to have. You can communicate with them. You can communicate with parents. Another way is to take virtual field trips. Now, virtual field trips are when you plan and select a list of specific websites and then have students go and look at those websites and answer questions and discover. Another way would be a web event, and a web event is where you can, team together with other schools and other cities, states, or countries, and have just a big, huge web event where get online and you have video cameras going, and teachers are teaching and students are talking with each other. You also have web quests, textbook websites, students creating multimedia presentations to present to the class, using productivity software, online assessments, interactive whiteboards. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about lesson planning with technology. The model that the book uses, and there's lots of different types of models for lesson planning, but they're presenting what is called the Assure model. And the Assure model for lesson planning, it makes sure that you assess and analyze, and it's an acronym, so it stands for each letter stands for a different technique that you need to use when you are going through your lesson planning. So the first thing that you need to do, and this is true whether you are integrating with technology or not, is that you analyze your learners. You have to know your students in order to plan. And this is why you cannot just plan something one year and then expect to be able to use that forever and ever. A really good, although there are teachers out there that do that and or appear to do that, the fact is that you do your plan, but then you make sure that you can adjust for each of your learners. So what you have to do is you have to assess what your learner understands about the content objectives, and then you also need to know what their skills are as far as technology is concerned, what their knowledge is about a topic, and most importantly, what are their interests? I mean, what are the things that they're interested in? Because if you teach a child according to his interests, or make a topic that they maybe don't like, see if you can find an angle that can, get them interested, then you're going to find that students are more interested in learning. Students are not interested in learning that which they don't want to learn. Remember, technology is a tool. It is not the goal of education. Yes, we want them to be able to think with technology. Yes, we want them to be able to use it, but we want to have them use it to remember the NETS standards, to think, to create, to problem solve, to collaborate. The next part of the Assure model is to state your objectives, and this is true of any lesson plan. Make sure that your objectives are measurable, that they are precise, and that they show an learner outcome. So you can't just say students will understand that there was a war between the North and the South. That is not a measurable objective. I see this all the time, especially with new teachers. They go, okay, students will understand. Well, you can't test understand. It has to be measurable. Students will be able to list. Students will be able to compare and contrast. Then you can, the more precise you are, the better that your outcomes will be. Bloom's taxonomy and Bloom's verbs Bloom's taxonomy verbs. I use that. I have that tool. I use that all the time for my lesson plans. And now there are some updates to Bloom's taxonomy with technology that shows some measurable outcomes using technology objectives. Then you have to also understand, the methods, the media, and the material. What teaching methods will you use? What media is appropriate? And what materials do you need? Do you need a camera? Do you need a headset that students can record audio with? You also need to know how you're going to use those methods and that media. How will you use the materials? What is your instructional strategy? Then you need to require learner participation. What will learners be required to do? How will your learners engage in participatory learning? How will your learners engage in discovery learning? And then finally, you want to evaluate your lesson. And this is done, you do it a little bit beforehand just to make sure that you've covered all of your bases. But after a lesson, you need to reflect. Did the lesson meet the objectives? How will you evaluate the technology that you used? How can you revise and improve that lesson plan so that the next time that you have students and you use that lesson, can you make it better? And that's how you plan using the Assure model. There is a whole section in your textbook about that. And by the way, this was done with Prezi. It's a great little tool for presentations. You are limited to 3 presentations for your sign-on, but I highly suggest that, especially in this unit, as we're going into presentation software and media, that you go play around with it. Okay, so make sure that, just to summarize a little bit, we've covered what technology integration looks like. Make sure that you review in your textbook the Assure model of lesson planning, and that you really pay attention to the different ways that you integrate with technology. If you have any questions, post them to the help discussion board.